My neighbor built a fence on my property, then a shed, then acted like I was the one causing problems when I asked him about it. The crazy part is that for a little while, I almost let it happen. Looking back now, that's the part that bothers me more than anything else. I live in a small neighborhood outside of Cedar Ridge, Pennsylvania, one of those places where people wave when they drive by, where kids ride bikes until the streetlights come on, and where everybody thinks they know exactly where every property line is, even if nobody has looked at a survey in 20 years. My backyard backed up to another lot that had changed owners a few times over the years. For the longest time, there wasn't much back there except grass, a few aging maple trees, and an area that sort of blended from one yard into another. Nothing was clearly marked. Nobody really cared. At least that's what I thought. The whole thing started on a Monday morning. Nothing dramatic. I was carrying a trash bag out to the bin before work, half asleep, thinking about coffee and whether I had enough gas in my truck to get through the week. I stepped into the backyard and immediately stopped. There was a fence. A brand new one, 6 feet tall, fresh cedar boards, perfectly straight, the kind of fence that costs real money and takes planning. I remember standing there squinting at it for a second. Well, I said to myself, guess somebody had a busy weekend. The new owner behind me had moved in about 6 months earlier. His name was Randall Pierce. Late 50s, friendly enough on the surface, always smiling, always talking. One of those guys who somehow managed to make every conversation about himself. Still, we had never had any problems. I figured maybe he finally decided he wanted more privacy. Honestly, I didn't think much about it. That should have been the end of the story. A few hours later, my lawn guy, Tony, was cutting the back section of grass. Tony wasn't much of a talker. We'd known each other almost 4 years, and I could probably count our total conversations on 2 hands. So when he shut off the mower and waved me over, I paid attention. He pointed toward the fence. You know your property goes past that, right? I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it sounded ridiculous. What are you talking about? I asked. Tony shrugged. Maybe I'm wrong. But every year I've cut this yard, I always figured your lot went another 10 feet or so past those trees. I looked at the fence again, then back at him. You serious? Pretty sure. That was it. No speech. No argument. He climbed back on the mower and went back to work. But something about the way he said it stuck with me. That night, I dug through a filing cabinet in my office. You know the one. The cabinet where all the important documents go to die. Mortgage paperwork, tax records, insurance forms. The kind of stuff you never touch until life suddenly demands it. After about 20 minutes of digging, I found my closing documents. Then I found the property survey. I spread everything across the dining room table and started comparing measurements. At first, I thought I was reading it wrong. Then I checked again. Then a third time. My stomach dropped. The property line wasn't where I thought it was. It wasn't where Randall apparently thought it was either. The fence wasn't sitting on the boundary. It wasn't even close. The fence was sitting well inside my property. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the map for a long time. Part of me wanted to get angry. Another part kept looking for an innocent explanation. Maybe the previous owner told him the wrong thing. Maybe old landmarks confused him. Maybe it was an honest mistake. The older I get, the more I try not to assume bad intentions when simple stupidity can explain something. So the next evening I walked over to talk to him. No confrontación. No acusaciones. Just a conversation. Randall answered the door with that same easy smile he always wore. Hey neighbor, he said. Got a minute? Sure. I explained what I'd found. Showed him a copy of the survey. Pointed out where I thought the property line actually sat. The entire time, he just nodded. Calm. Relaxed. Almost too relaxed. Then he said something that immediately caught my attention. Oh yeah, the previous owner mentioned something about that line. Said it was somewhere around there. Somewhere around there. Not exactly confidence-inspiring. I smiled politely. Maybe we should double-check before this becomes a bigger issue. Absolutely, he said. No problem. Easy. Too easy. I walked home feeling relieved. I honestly thought we'd have it sorted out within a few days. But days turned into a week. A week turned into 2. And then one morning I heard trucks, power tools, and the sound of multiple people working behind my house. When I stepped outside and looked beyond that fence, I realized Randall had no intention of double-checking anything. because while I've been waiting for answers, he had already started building something else. And that was the moment this stopped feeling like a misunderstanding. The next thing I saw made my stomach sink. At first, I thought maybe they were putting in landscaping or some kind of garden project. People do that all the time. A few bags of gravel, a couple raised beds, maybe a small patio. This wasn't that. There were contractors moving around with purpose. Lumber stacked in neat piles. Concrete blocks, metal brackets, sheets of siding, and a trench running from Randall's house straight toward the construction area. Even from a distance, I could tell what was happening. They were building a shed. Not one of those little prefab boxes you throw together over a weekend. A real structure. The kind somebody plans. The kind somebody spends money on. The kind nobody builds accidentally. I walked closer and watched for a minute. One of the workers was leveling a gravel base, while another was unloading materials from trailer. Everybody moved with the confidence of people following a plan that had already been approved. Then Randall spotted me. He waved like we were discussing the weather. "Morning, Ethan." I nodded. "What are you building?" "Oh, just a little storage shed." I looked at the growing pile of materials. "That's a pretty serious storage shed." He laughed. "Figured if I'm doing it, I might as well do it right." Something about the way he said it rubbed me the wrong way. Not what he said, how he said it. Like the decision had already been made. Like my opinion didn't matter. I pointed toward the fence. "We should probably verify that property line before you go much further." His smile never moved. "Yeah, we'll get around to it." Then he turned back toward the workers. Conversation over. I stood there for a second feeling strangely dismissed. Not angry. Not yet. Just unsettled. Over the next 2 days, the shed went up fast. Faster than I expected. Walls. Roof. Windows. A steel door. Electrical wiring. By the third evening, there was already a light glowing inside. That's when I finally admitted something to myself. Nobody invests that much money into a structure without deciding exactly where it's going. This wasn't confusion anymore. This was confidence. Confidence that I wasn't going to stop him. That realization sat with me all night. I barely slept, not because of the land, because of what it represented. If somebody can move a boundary once and get away with it, what stops them from doing it again? The following morning, I called a survey company. $980. More than I wanted to spend, but cheaper than years of arguing. The survey crew arrived about a week later. 3 guys, a truck, tripods, GPS equipment. No drama, no opinions, just measurements. I spent most of the afternoon watching them work. There's something strangely comforting about professionals dealing in facts. No emotions, no assumptions, just numbers. When they finally started placing bright orange markers in the ground, I could already see where things were heading. The lead surveyor walked over carrying a clipboard. "You were right," he said. I didn't answer immediately. Part of me had still hoped I wasn't. He handed me the report. The fence crossed roughly 8 feet into my property. The shed crossed approximately 5 feet. 5 feet. That number sounds small until somebody takes it from you. Then it feels huge. I thanked him and stood there alone after they left. The orange flags stretched across the yard like a line of truth nobody could ignore anymore. At least that's what I thought. That evening I took photographs. Lots of them. Wide shots. Close shots. Pictures showing the flags. Pictures showing the shed. Pictures showing the fence. I documented everything. Not because I was planning a lawsuit. Because experience has taught me that people remember events very differently when money gets involved. After that, I printed the survey report and highlighted the relevant sections. Then I wrote a simple note. No threats, no attitude, no legal language. Just facts. "Hey, Randall, I had the survey completed. The fence and part of the shed appear to be on my property. I'd appreciate it if we could work together to resolve this before it becomes a larger issue." I walked over and left it at his front door. Then I waited. 1 day passed. Nothing. 2 days. Nothing. 5 days. Still nothing. No phone call. No text. No knock on the door. Nothing. By the end of the week, I knew exactly what was happening. He wasn't ignoring the note because he hadn't seen it. He was ignoring it because he had. Then things started getting weird. A few evenings later, I walked outside with a glass of iced tea and noticed 2 brand new Adirondack chairs sitting directly inside the disputed area. Not near it. inside it, facing west toward the sunset. I just stared at them. A week earlier, that space had been empty. Now, somebody was treating it like a private resort. A few days after that, a small fire pit appeared. Then decorative landscaping stones. Then a couple flower pots. Every change was small by itself, but together they sent a very clear message. Randall wasn't using the land. He was establishing ownership, at least in his mind. The strange thing was how calm he remained through all of it. Most people get defensive when confronted. Most people get nervous. Randall acted comfortable, like he believed time was working for him. One evening, I finally walked over again. This time, there was no pretending, no friendly small talk. He was sitting in one of those chairs when I arrived. The survey report was folded on my arm. I pointed toward the orange markers. Randall, this isn't a misunderstanding anymore. He looked up calmly. What isn't? The property line. His expression barely changed. I unfolded the survey. The fence is on my property. Part of the shed is on my property. The survey confirms it. He leaned back, crossed his arms, and for the first time since we'd met, I saw something underneath that friendly smile. Arrogance. Not loud arrogance. Quiet arrogance. The dangerous kind. The kind that assumes everyone else will eventually give up. Then he said something that completely changed how I viewed the situation. You know how these things work, right? I frowned. No. Explain it to me. He gestured casually around the yard. People use land long enough, maintain it, improve it. Eventually it becomes theirs. For a second, I genuinely thought he was joking. Then I realized he wasn't. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's not how property law works. He shrugged. Depends. No, it doesn't. Again, he shrugged. We'll see. We'll see. 3 simple words. But they told me everything. He wasn't confused. He wasn't mistaken. He wasn't trying to solve the problem. He was betting on something. Maybe he thought I wouldn't spend the money. Maybe he thought I wouldn't hire an attorney. Maybe he thought I cared too much about keeping the peace. Whatever the reason, he had convinced himself that eventually I'd stop pushing. That conversation replayed in my head the entire night. Not because I was angry, because I was disappointed. I'd spent weeks trying to handle things respectfully, trying to be reasonable, trying to give him every opportunity to correct the situation himself. And somehow that had been interpreted as weakness. The next morning, while drinking coffee at my kitchen table and staring out at that shed sitting partly on my land, I finally made a decision. I was done treating this as a disagreement between neighbors. From that point forward, I was going to treat it exactly for what it was. A property violation. And once I made that decision, everything started moving much faster than Randall expected. The morning after my conversation with Randall, I stopped trying to solve the problem neighbor to neighbor. I called the county zoning office. Nothing dramatic. No angry speech. No threats. I simply explained what had happened. I had a certified survey. A fence crossed the property line. A structure crossed the property line. And I wanted to know what options existed. The woman on the phone listened quietly. Then she said something simple. We can send someone out to take a look. That was it. No promises. No guarantees. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like facts mattered more than personalities. About 10 days later, 2 inspectors arrived. Plain truck, clipboards, measuring equipment. The kind of people who look completely unimpressed by everything because they've seen it all before. I walked them through the situation, showed them the survey, explained the timeline. They asked a few questions, took notes, measured distances, photographed the shed, photographed the fence. One of them spent several minutes studying the electrical line that ran from Randall's house to the structure. Then he asked a question that immediately caught my attention. Do you know whether this was approved for this location? I shook my head. No idea. He nodded slowly, the kind of nod that tells you he already suspects the answer. After about an hour, they packed up and left. No conclusions, no predictions, just a professional thank you and a promise that their report would be submitted. Then the waiting started again. Only this time it felt different, heavier, like standing outside before a thunderstorm when the air changes and you know something is coming. 3 days later, something came, an official notice, and it hit like a freight train. The fence violated property boundaries. The shed violated setback requirements. The encroachment was confirmed. Corrective action required within 30 days. remove, or relocate. No gray area. No maybe. No we'll see. 30 days. That same evening, there was a knock at my door. I already knew who it was. Randall stood on my porch. For the first time since this entire mess began, he looked uncomfortable. Not defeated. Not yet. But definitely worried. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped outside. He rubbed the back of his neck and looked toward the backyard. "I think the county's overreacting." I almost laughed. Overreacting. That was one way to describe building on someone else's property. He continued, "You know how government people are? They make everything complicated." I stayed quiet. Eventually he got to the point. "What if we just leave everything where it is?" There it was. The real reason he came. Not an apology. Not accountability. A shortcut. "You could sign something," he said. "Just give permission. We keep everything where it is and move on." I looked at him for a few seconds. Then I asked the question that mattered most. "Are you offering to buy that section of land?" His eyes blinked. Just once. A tiny hesitation. "No, not really. Not really." Funny how people always become vague when money enters the conversation. I nodded. "Then my answer is no." His face tightened. Only slightly. But enough. For weeks, he had assumed I would eventually fold. Now he finally understood I wasn't going to. The next month was strangely quiet. Day 25 came. Nothing changed. Day 28. Nothing. Day 30. Still nothing. The shed sat exactly where it always had. The fence stood exactly where it always had. The chairs remained. The fire pit remained. It was almost as if Randall believed deadlines were suggestions. Then day 31 arrived. The fine started. Daily. Relentless. And suddenly time was no longer his friend. 2 weeks later, I woke up to the sound of trucks. Heavy trucks. The kind that mean work is about to happen. I stepped outside with a cup of coffee and immediately saw a contractor's trailer parked near the back of Randall's yard. Several workers were unloading tools. For a moment, I just stood there watching. Then Randall appeared, and I'll never forget how different he looked. No confidence. No ismite. No speeches. Just a tired man staring at a very expensive mistake. Neither of us said anything. There wasn't much left to say. The workers started with the shed, panel by panel, screw by screw. The structure that had taken only days to build slowly came apart. The light inside flickered one final time before the power was disconnected. Then darkness. The walls came down. The roof disappeared. The foundation was broken apart and loaded into trailers. Everything that had looked so permanent suddenly looked temporary. Then they moved to the fence. Posts were pulled. Boards were stacked. Holes were filled. Grass was leveled. It was strangely quiet work. No drama. No arguments. Just consequences. By early afternoon, everything was gone. The shed. The fence. The chairs. The fire pit. All of it. The backyard looked almost identical to the way it had looked before Randall moved in. I stood there for a long time after the workers left. Not celebrating. Not smiling. Just thinking. Because the truth is, this was never really about 5 feet of land. It was about boundaries. Not the ones drawn on surveys. The invisible ones people test every day. The line between confidence and entitlement. The line between patience and weakness. The line between being a good neighbor and becoming an easy target. A few weeks later, I saw Randall standing near the back of his yard, just looking at the empty space where everything used to be. For a second, I thought he might walk over. Maybe apologize. Maybe explain himself. Maybe blame me. Honestly, I wasn't sure. Instead, he simply nodded once. Then he turned around and went back inside. And that was the last meaningful interaction we've had. Now here's the part I'm still not completely sure about. Could I have stopped everything earlier? Probably. Should I have pushed harder from the beginning? Maybe. But if I'd immediately gone on the attack, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering whether there had been a peaceful solution. At least now I know. I gave every opportunity, every conversation, every benefit of the doubt, and eventually the truth became impossible to ignore. But I'm curious what you think. If somebody slowly started taking something that belonged to you, would you have handled it the same way? Would you have called the county sooner? Would you have hired a lawyer immediately? Or do you think I waited too long? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because situations like this always split people right down the middle. Some say patience is strength. Others say patience just gives opportunists more time. So tell me honestly, what do you think that line is? And if you've ever dealt with a neighbor who thought the rules didn't apply to them, I'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.